Romana, Isabella Soutus, and I run a theater company called NASHi Experimental Theater Club here in Kyiv, Ukraine. I have lived in Kyiv over half of my life and have seen the capital reflect the nation's transition through contrasting self-expressions, dragging itself out of the post-Soviet 90s and early aughts towards a new Berlin of the East, thanks to the Ukrainian youth roused by the 2014 Revolution of Dignity. Today, former hospitals built in the brutalist style house coffee shops that brew a better oat milk flat white than you can find nearly anywhere else. Skateboarders who look like they have just walked out of a viral TikTok grind along the marble stairs in front of UNESCO heritage sites. At least once a week, an expat will remark just how European Kyiv feels. And yet, there is a reality that clings to Kyiv like an oily film. It is a city at war. No one would compare it to Kharkiv, which is more aggressively bombed due to its only 40-kilometer distance from the Russian border. But it isn't as safe as Lviv, which serves as the red line for many foreigners willing to take the risk and enter the country. Young men of conscription age, now 25 to 60, cannot cross the border without special permissions issued by the Ministry of Culture that indicate that their exit is for cultural diplomacy purposes. And more importantly, only temporary. The images of contemporary Ukraine transmitted to the world are often grim. Bombing after missile, after ballistic missile, after bombing. And yet, we cannot project joy or safety for fear of seeming ungrateful or less in danger than we truly are. The largest ground war on European soil since World War II once again takes place on the land I call home. It is under these circumstances that I wrestle with the politics of placemaking in virtual reality. I am forced to ask myself, what does it mean for a Ukrainian to enter into the virtual world? In December 2024, NASHi performed in the internationally synchronized multi-spatial performance, The Books of Jacob, Part 2, along with the other members of the Digital Performance Network. 12 actors performed on physical stages in 6 different countries and on a shared digital stage in virtual reality. Audiences had the opportunity to either put on a VR headset and experience the performance digitally or from their seat in their respective country's theater, where the virtual environment was projected and layered onto the stage. As a part of our preparations, our collaborators at Dream Adoption Society sent us an article by Manthia Diawara on the Martinician poet and philosopher Edouard Glissant. One of the theses of Glissant's work focuses on an end to the idea of a border that defends and protects. Borders must be permeable. Throughout the piece, Diawara elucidates on this philosophy, concluding that her own work, inspired by Glissant, would have to open our imaginations to the possibilities of disaffiliation, racial contamination, creolization, and fluid frontiers. These ideas spoke to the subject of the show and its creative process. We, as the Digital Performance Network, were performing simultaneously across frontiers, weaving a collective narrative about the mutability of man's desire to find a higher purpose regardless of his current circumstances or location. And yet, our team in Ukraine couldn't shake our disturbance at the idea of a permeable border, let alone its veneration. Those feelings reminded us of the speech by Ukrainian art critic and curator Boris Filomenko, Art After Pacifism.
Ciao a tutti, dear friends, dear audience. I'm from Kharkiv. I'm 31 years old, and until 24th of February, I'm a pacifist. And today I would like to talk a little bit about art after pacifism. Since the proclamation of independence 31 years ago, Ukraine has not waged wars. And what I'd like to talk about in my speech today is in many ways a story of fundamental change. The transition from pacifism to militarism in artistic field as well, but also it's my attempt to tell that this opposition between pacifism and militarism could be better discarded as irrelevant to contemporary reality. In the very beginning, I would like to say that doves of peace are dead. In this drawing by Alevtina Kakhidze, you can see two doves with the names Pacifism and Never Again, who were killed under shelling by Russian missiles in Ukraine. This work defines my speech today, namely the question of how discourse of peace and images of peace turn out today to be a delusion, a failure, a rotten statements. There is nothing worse and more senseless today than saying no war, to be for peace, and acting on basis of these abstract old-fashioned formulas. Along with the dead doves of peace, I keep coming back to John Lennon's Imagine and Pablo Picasso's Guernica as two examples of significant artworks that have suddenly become completely irrelevant for today. I'm comparing them because in a broad sense, they represent two sides of the same message, same simple message about the peace. Lennon talks about an utopia of complete mutual understanding, an utopia without war, while Picasso, on the contrary, shows that war is terrible, shows a dystopia in which everyone perishes. Today, in 2022, there are protests in front of Guernica against the supply of weapons to Ukraine. And this event like this, for me, it's a new situation because activists who, in this slide, they took part in this action, not actually grasping and anti-war images offered them by the 20th century, by they are not taking a step toward a new reality. And in this reality, where weapons become a necessary element for the survival and defense of huge European country in the face of colonial aggression, they choose, I think, ready-made decisions and all solutions which don't work in the face of evil, death, and genocide. Also, out of inertia, not because they figure out what is happening in Ukraine. These activists write on banners such a slogan: "War is the death of people. War is the death of art." I think that by opposing art and war in this way, participants of this action not only reproduce the old-fashioned division between art and war, but also deny themselves the opportunity to see that art does not disappear during the wartime, but rather change in many forms, and Ukrainian artists now feel uncomfortable creating works during a hot war, but at the same time refuse to ask themselves, rarely refuse to ask themselves the radical question of what they can still do. Many Ukrainian artists are still working in this, in many ways, ethical choice to do an artwork or not to do. Therefore, the pacifists today, of their own free will, lose two opportunities at once: to see reality in its new manifestations, and also to refuse to ask themselves the question of how they can be part of this changing world without reducing art and without taking taking power from such works as Picasso's Guernica.
We, as Ukrainian artists, no longer lived in what we believed to be the naive virtual reality of binary pacifism, nor in its liberal utopia of a borderless future. We agreed with Filonenko that Russia's full-scale invasion changed the rules of the 21st century, and its no longer enduring motto, never again. It had become our responsibility as artists to explore this new reality without reducing our art to a simple antithesis to war. In the 3 years since February 24th, 2022, Ukrainians have brought this war into every creative act. There has been a boom of documentary and verbatim theater focused on the experiences of soldiers, veterans, their families, the civil servants, and medical workers who face the first blowback, and the civilians whose lives touch the front line. For all the ways we acknowledge how this war has shaped contemporary Ukraine, we cannot ignore the cycles of colonial violence that have shaped the history of Ukraine. To more specifically reflect on this symposium's focus, we must acknowledge that the cycles have shaped Ukraine into a perpetually hybrid world, both virtual and real, all at once. Despite our insistence that there has always been a Ukraine, and we have always been its citizens, our neighbors have vehemently disagreed. Ukraina roughly translates to land of borders. I would posit that it specifically refers to the land where the borders of various empires end. Prior to having an officially recognized country to identify with, our land's inhabitants often describe themselves as tutishni, which roughly translates to people from here. However, Russia has denied the existence of both Ukraine and a Ukrainian people for centuries. This practice is the inspiration for doublespeak, and one mastered by the Kremlin's propaganda machine. One need only turn to the essay on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians, written by Putin himself, to understand. It has been this cycle of recolonization and decolonization that helps Ukrainians intuitively understand the hyperreality of our world. Ukrainians inhabit a country that simultaneously does not exist and must be destroyed. The nation equivalent of Schrodinger's cat. The books of Jacob became a perfect setting for us to explore the intersection of the virtual and the real, and in turn, how that has shaped both our and your understanding of Ukraine. Originally, we had cast an actor named Rob. 10 days after we started rehearsal, Rob had to drop out because conscription officers had picked him up while he was taking his daughter to the playground. This was not the first time we had to recast a project due to conscription, nor was it the last. We had brought on another actor, Arthur, who was under fighting age. But the echo of Rob's conscription lingered over the rest of the production.
Роль Якова Франка в цій виставі мав виконувати інший актор Роб Фельдман. Та в цій новій реальності, в якій ми всі з вами зараз живемо, ролі можуть дуже швидко змінюватись. І Роб впродовж репетицій отримав нову роль захисника нашої країни. Я ж для таких ролей ще трохи не готовий і ще трохи молодий, щоб мені їх видавали. Тому я тут, перед вами, маю можливість грати роль Якова Франка. Маю можливість працювати, відпочивати, радіти, спокійно спати, смачно їсти лише тому, що мене захищають інші персонажі цієї йобнутої п'єси нашого світу. Проте, на відміну від театру, ми самі здатні впливати на те, що буде в фіналі. Головне не залишатись просто глядачами. Потрібно обирати роль. І грати.
Feel compelled to say that Rob is currently alive, although he is on the front. You can follow him on Instagram, where he regularly posts about his experiences. The front is also a virtual reality for Ukrainians, although we regularly grieve the repercussions of its reality. Despite the fact that many abroad laud those of us in Ukraine for our bravery, the ones who sit in Kyiv or further west often feel like cowards. The war touches our daily lives. In every one of those coffee shops, you will find a sign that says Free Azovstal Defenders. We support the ZSU, or the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Or my personal favorite, here we do not speak the language of the enemy. And yet, despite the fact that all of us have woken up in the middle of the night to the air raid siren, or the explosions in the sky, or the phone call that tolls the loss of a loved one, we all know whatever experience we have is nothing like it is out there. To go to the front requires crossing the threshold of potential death, and the brave or unfortunate soldiers who live there bring us back tales we know are softened at the edges. Both soldiers on leave and
I still can't fully comprehend that this is my reality now, that I'm no longer in the trenches. When I close my eyes or sit alone, I feel like I'm still there. I see the trenches in my sleep. These nightmares never leave me.
And veterans alike often say that life away from the front becomes a kind of virtual reality. Veteran Mykola Hrushinsky described that feeling in the article for the counteroffensive. The article is about the cutting-edge virtual reality therapy being developed for Ukrainian veterans suffering from PTSD and phantom limb pain. The treatments use VR to evoke emotional responses in veterans by showing a 2-minute simulation of combat operations as a form of exposure therapy. Its goal is to use the virtual to relieve the pain of reality. The same headsets we use to participate in this symposium create an unsimulated virtual reality for the soldiers piloting an army of drones on both sides of this conflict. Their minds, eyes, and fingers control death machines that now account for approximately 80% of the war's casualties. It is clear that virtual reality in Ukraine is not being pioneered in order to imagine a new reality, but instead to recontextualize the trauma of our lived experience. Our veterans use it to return to the trenches and stripped their memories of their potency. Our team entered the virtual reality of the books of Jacob and performed in front of the bombed Hotel Ukraine in Chernihiv. As a Ukrainian artist, I straddle two worlds that at once seem both virtual and real. I believe theater to be an act of simulated creation that allows the audience to witness a rehearsal of reality that inspires true change outside the walls of the theater. But the Ukrainian reality is war and its side effects. It is rooted in violence that feels necessary because without it, there is only extermination. Despite my progressive values, this is not a progressive stance. And yet, it is a truth I accept and a truth I bring into my creative work, into the rehearsal of reality. When a Ukrainian enters the virtual world, they bring the war with them. In the words of Peter Brook, I can take any empty space and call it a bare stage. A man walks across this empty space while someone else is watching him, and this is all that is needed for an act of theater to be engaged. Virtual reality seems like a stage most bare, a space for infinite imagination. NASHi, as a frontline laboratory, part of the digital performance network, cannot be a bare stage, even in VR. Ours is a stage littered with histories and ghosts. In the virtual world, you can join me here in Kiev. But when you leave, you will bring this war back with you. Thank you very much.